Well, we're nearly halfway through April 2025, and you might be wondering, Charles, we haven't seen you out and about photographing birds. Well, where I live in southeast Queensland, we've had a horror stretch of weather. We had a cyclone in early February, then we just had rain after rain after rain, and I think because of all of this bad weather, the birds have just disappeared. But in the last week and a half, I've gone out a few times trying to find birds in places where I normally find birds quite easily, like Lake Eden and Newport Wetland Reserve, which is near Redcliffe, and a couple of other places around where I live. And there has been very little birds. Lake Eden, where I see just about every time egrets of some type, no egrets. I've gone out there with my camera and I've stated like, well, I'm at Lake Eden today and we're going to walk around and take photos of birds. I never published anything because there was hardly any birds around. The same as when I went to Newport Wetlands. There's normally so many shorebirds, waders, but all I saw down there were just pied stilts. And as I was walking around looking for birds, I thought to myself, well, how about I turn the photos that I've taken into an educational videos for the people who watch my YouTube channel. So today I want to share 5 handy tips that I feel would benefit the people that watch these videos. And at the end of the video, I'll share a bonus tip to help you understand why patience is a key when photographing birds. And some of these topics I've shared already, but today I just want to include them all, and I'll include links to videos where I've covered a specific topic in depth, like metering, where I'll discuss a little bit further, so you can go and see the specific video where I discuss in detail the different types of metering modes. So as most of my subscribers know, I shoot with a Nikon Z6 II and the Nikon 200-500 f5.6. Late last year, I bought a Nikon 1.4 teleconverter because I was just tired of not having the reach. This is my setup every time I go out now photographing birds. So the number one for me is the metering mode that you choose. On Nikon cameras and about every other camera, we have 3 basic metering modes. We have spot metering, we have center weighted metering, and we have matrix metering for Nikon. If you're using a Canon, then it would be evaluative. And I'll put a link here to the video that I've done quite a while ago with Trevor the Heron. If you haven't met Trevor before, well, you haven't watched some of my videos because Trevor has been a long time companion of me. Let's look at the metering modes now. So the first one here is center weighted, and this is the metering mode that I use around 80% of the time. On the left is the raw file. You can see it's fairly even, but there's quite a bit of dark area. And I've put my focus point on the duck. On the right is the edited version. But you can see that the image is fairly well balanced because it's on center weighted. The next one here is spot metering. Spot metering means that where we're focused, this is where the camera will meter the subject. So if your subject is white, it will meter for that. If your subject is black, it will meter for that. It won't look anywhere else. If you're photographing in the shadows, or if you're photographing a dark bird with a very bright background, so that the dark bird will not be dark, but your background might be blown out. This noisy miner here was in the shade and there was quite a bit of light in the background. It metered on the bird, which was quite dark, and gave me a brighter background. This here is matrix metering or evaluative metering. Matrix metering is, it will evaluate the whole frame. Whether your bird is white, whether your bird is black, it's not looking just at that, it's looking at the whole frame. So if your bird is black, but the rest of the scene is white, well, it's going to look at all that white and say, well, I've got to balance the whole scene. And this plover is just walking on a grassy area at Lake Eden, and you can see the light is very even. This was taken at around 10 o'clock in the morning, so light is coming straight down. You can see that by the shadow on the bird, that it's just straight underneath it. And this is why matrix metering works here, because the light is very average throughout the whole frame. But this rarely happens because most of the time we're out photographing birds in the morning or in the afternoon. And very rarely are we going to get a bird like this, because normally the bird will be in the tree or it's a water bird. So the light will be very different between your subject and your background. Next one here is frame rate. On my Nikon Z6 II, I have continuous low, which I can program anywhere from 1 frame to 5 frames per second. I have continuous high, which gives me around 6 frames per second, or continuous high extended at 14 frames per second. And this is very important if you're photographing birds that are very active, like water birds that are going to take off, or an egret that's about to dive down for a fish, or a kingfisher that's flying into a nest. But I only use continuous high extended when I need to. If I'm just photographing ducks that are just frolicking on the water, I'm not going to use continuous high extended because I don't need 14 frames per second. Look at these two examples and you will see the difference between continuous high, 6 frames per second, and continuous high extended. So the last time I went to Lake Eden, the only bird that I really saw a lot of were these Australasian grebes. I want you to look right towards the right hand frame. You can see there's an Australasian grebe just ducking down, and I was on continuous high, 6 frames per second. This is the next shot, so I've missed quite a bit of the action. If I had been in continuous high extended, I would have had quite a bit of the movement as the bird ducked into the water. This one here, I was using continuous high extended. This is the first frame. This is the second. You can see it hasn't moved much, and this is the third frame here. You can see I've got 3 frames. If I had been using just continuous high, I would have only had maybe 2. I might have even missed the whole movement of it taking off. Because this is continuous high, and this is continuous high extended. Quite a bit of difference, between 6 frames per second and 14 frames per second. The next one here is framing your subject, and this is not just where we put our bird. A lot of the time we're putting the bird in the center of the image because we're trying to track a bird, so it's much easier if we're tracking birds to have our bird in the center of the frame. Unless the bird is standing still on the branch, then we can position it so that it's not in the center. But when it comes to editing, a lot of people just like leaving it into 6x4. Sometimes it's not necessary to leave it into 6x4 because you have dead space. And the 2 most often crop that I use is either 6x4 or 16:9, which is video mode. Looks like a panorama. Here are 2 examples of the same birds but cropped differently. So this is an Australian great egret, and I framed it as a 6x4 because I want to show some of the background, the mangroves in the background. It just looked really good that way. But this one here, as it kept walking along, I decided to crop it into a 16:9. I want to show that it was moving along. The first one, it wasn't moving too much, but here it was just moving along, and it's a very good idea of cropping your images differently when you're displaying them on social media because it gets boring. But if you mix it up into 6x4, 16:9, you're giving the opportunity of showing what that bird looks like in a different type of framing. I was very lucky when I was at Newport Wetlands that I saw these pelicans flying across, going towards Newport Waterways, which was just next door to where I was taking photos. There was 3 of them flying around, and here you can see I've used 16:9 because I didn't want too much of the sky. So I've cropped it like that. I've got the 2 pelicans, but I don't have too much background. I've focused on my subjects, and I want to make my subjects as big as possible, and this is why I framed it this way. Whereas here, I zoomed in a bit and I was just photographing this 1 pelican, and I've cropped it into 6x4 to give it maximum exposure. Think about when you come home, how are you going to crop your images? How are you going to frame them? Not every time we go out do we have the opportunity of photographing good light. We might start out in the morning of having great light, but as we stick around a little bit later in the day, especially in summertime, we end up with harsh light because the sun rises and we get very harsh light. And sometimes, even in the morning, depending on the bird that you're photographing, then you might still have very harsh light. This was at Newport Wetlands. These are pied stilts. And look at the background. It's very bright. I was using spot metering, but it was still very bright. There's a lot of reflections on there, but the image still looks nice because I've controlled the harsh light. Here's another example of harsh light. This was very early in the morning. The sun was just reflecting off the water here, but look what it gives me. It gives me my subject nicely detailed, and I've blown the background out. There's no detail. There's no way I could recover that detail. It's just blown out. So I've left it blown out and just concentrated on editing the bird. And at times we're photographing birds in trees high up. When we're shooting into the sky, especially towards the middle of the day, we're going to get this sort of light, a very harsh light. But using the correct metering mode, you're going to end up with your subject with a bird very well exposed. And forget about the background. Now I'm sure there's going to be people in the comments here stating that they don't like in-camera cropping. And I've done a video on it, I'll put a link here. In-camera cropping, whether you have a crop sensor camera or a full frame camera, means that you can go, for myself, I can go from FX mode to DX mode. For example, instead of being at 500 mils in FX mode, if I go to DX mode, I've got a viewpoint of 750 mils. So I've got a much closer view of my subject. And I've magnified that image. I'm not shooting at 24 megabytes anymore. I'm losing half of those megabytes. This is in FX mode. The duck is quite a bit away from me. I'm already at 700 mils because I've got the teleconverter on. Now I've gone into DX mode. Can you see that I've brought everything in? This helps my metering. This helps my focus mode. Here's another example. This is this plover that was walking around on the grassy fields. This is as close as I could get it. You can see it's quite small in the frame, but using the DX crop mode, I'm much closer to it. Think about when you're outside. I'm not saying that you should do this, but just think about that. Why not crop in camera and help your autofocus and help your metering achieve a better photo than going home and cropping the same image? You're going to end up with the same photo. And this is my bonus tip. Don't rush your photography. Take your time. Wildlife photography, photographing birds for me, is a passion. I'm not going to go to Lake Eden if I'm on a stopwatch saying, okay, I've only got 3/4 of an hour here, I'm going to rush around. If I know that I've only got an hour at Lake Eden, and sometimes I don't have much time, I'm going to say to myself, well, I don't have the time to walk around the whole lake. I'm just going to enjoy the time that I'm here. I know that in a 1 hour time period, I can walk around half of the lake. So I'm going to say, well, I'm only going to walk around half of the lake and I'm going to enjoy my time. I'm going to spend time just watching the birds and hope to get a very unusual shot of a bird. And that's, for me, what I look at. I don't look at rushing around saying, I've got to cover this whole area, or I've got to take 50 odd different types of birds this morning. No, I'm going to take my time and I'm not going to rush my photography. When I was at Newport Wetlands the last time, there was just a couple of these Australasian grebes. But look at the reflections in the water. Can you see that it looks like the eyes doubled over? Because there's just slight ripples. And I was only at 6 frames per second, so I just took a few photos. I wasn't rushing myself. I ended up with about 10 photos. But look at this one. I wasn't rushing. I didn't say, okay, I've got a couple of photos, quick, keep going. This was the 7th frame that I took. I've got a perfect eye. I've got perfect reflection. I mightn't have got this shot if I just rushed it saying, okay, well, I've got a photo of the Australian grebe. Let's move on. Let me try to find another bird. This is this welcome swallow. It's just looking at me here. And I end up taking about a dozen photos because I know these welcome swallows could take off at any time, but also they have a habit of just looking around and sometimes preening themselves when they're just sitting still like this. But here, I've got it just looking down on itself. At times when I post photos on social media, I'll add a caption. So for this photo here, I could add a caption as, oh, my feet are still there. If its feet are dirty, wow, where did I put my feet last time? They're just so muddy. Think about that when we post images sometimes, we want to add a funny caption. Think about just not rushing, taking a few photos and saying, well, when I come home, I'm going to select just a couple of different photos to show the different poses that this bird could pose in. And thanks for watching. I hope that you found some of these handy tips beneficial to you. If you have, give the video a big thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. Really helps me out. And I'll see you next time when I'm out and about.